Chapter 3. Nobody's right if everybody's wrong. Lindy turned her head in time to see Parker's brake lights flash before he drove out of the clinic's parking lot. He turned left toward the police station. As he disappeared behind an old brick building, her flustered demeanor did not, as she had hoped, disappear with him. She turned back toward the body and fell still and silent. She'd be damned if anyone, especially Melinda, was going to see her in that condition. It took counting to 50 before she felt it was safe to approach Melinda. "Melinda, what do you know?" she forced out awkwardly. "For a start, you and Parker should bury the hatchet and try not burying it into each other's skull," she remarked as she carefully gathered her tools. "I don't want to talk about it," Lindy said petulantly. "Suit yourself, but it's not going to get any better ignoring the future. An opportunity is an opportunity, and these don't come along very often. Besides, it's going to happen, and enough. I said I don't want to talk about it. It's bad enough I have to live through it." "Okay, your point is made," Melinda said, rapidly backing away from the topic. "Now for the body. It's a woman, about 26. She's 5 feet 7 inches, kind of blonde, and I'd estimate at 115 pounds. She's Caucasian. Pretty, I think. That's about all I can give you now. I've really got to get back to the lab to get some real answers." Melinda hadn't given Lindy and Parker the same information. It was her way of forcing them to stop acting like 5-year-olds and talk to each other. She was tired of seeing two people who couldn't keep their hands off each other for 2 years, now avoiding each other. Now, when they didn't stay out of range of each other, it simply became a series of misunderstandings that turned into sniper attacks. Lindy, still percolating, stepped into the crime scene area, made a few notes, stepped under the overhang at the entrance, and looked at her reflection in the door's glass pane. She stepped closer, then moved to the side and looked across the glass at a shallow angle. She turned toward Melinda and her crew, who were loading up for departure. Lindy shouted, "Hold up!" She quickly trotted over to the van. "There's something on the door. We already dusted the door. Not the handle. There's something on the glass, something other than fingerprints. Gerald, give Detective Martin your fingerprint kit." "But," Gerald started to object. "Or stay here in the rain with her," Melinda said. Gerald reached into the van, pulled out the kit, and handed it to Lindy. "Be careful with it, and don't let the rain get on my stuff." "Don't worry. I'll be careful," she quickly said, and then hurried back to the door. Melinda and her crew headed back to the lab. After removing the powder from the kit, Lindy sprinkled a little on her hand and blew it onto the door. She did it again and again. More dust stuck to some parts of the glass than others. 2 dots, one on top of the other, and an inch apart, emerged. She blew powder to the right of the dots. A 3 appeared. She repeated the procedure. To the right of the 3, another 3 appeared. To the left of the dots, a 5 appeared. Then the wind turned the rain horizontal, and the writing began to run. She blocked the wind with her body and continued powdering. To the left of the 5, a 1 appeared. To the left of the 1, an S or maybe another 5 appeared. S1533 or maybe 515:33, she muttered. The rain was coming harder. The evidence was flowing down the door. She struggled to pull her cell phone from her front pocket. Only the remnants of the message were left by the time she snapped the picture with her cell phone. What was left of the message was bits and pieces and would make no sense to anyone else except the person she didn't want to talk to. The thought of it ate at her. It was the last thing she wanted to do. Russell gently cleared his throat. "Detective Martin, there's a woman here, a doctor, who says she runs the clinic, and she wants to talk to you." Escorted by Russell, Lindy walked back to the crime scene border where the doctor, Dr. Gasol, was waiting. Dr. Gasol carried 145 pounds on a barely 5-foot 2-inch frame. Still, she was graceful. Her brown hair was pulled back into a tight, tidy French bun, which made her ears appear to stick out prominently. That, coupled with her droopy brown eyes, gave her an odd, sad appearance. "What's happened?" the doctor asked. Lindy pushed aside the question so that she could take command of the encounter. "The officer said that you run the clinic." "Yes, I'm the director, Dr. Gasol." "What has happened?" "There's been an incident." "An incident?" What incident? Were you expecting anyone this morning? No, not until 9. I come in early to get set up and do the paperwork. I'm always the first one here. Please tell me what's happened. Have there been any problems at the clinic lately? I'm not answering any questions until You look familiar. Do I know you? Lindy looked around to see if anyone was within earshot. Let's stick to my questions, please. I would if I knew what I was sticking to. Tell me what's going on, or I'm saying nothing more. Lindy's stern expression made no impact on the clinic director, who had been hardened by years of demonstrators' hateful gazes, profanity, and threats. Seeing that the director was not going to bend, Lindy acquiesced. Okay, a body, female, was discovered in front of the clinic entrance this morning a little after 6. Any more than that, I'm not at liberty to discuss. Oh my God. Dr. Gasol put her right hand over her mouth. Staring at the clinic, she froze. 10 seconds later, she shook herself back. I should have expected this. Why? There have always been profanity-laced phone calls and threats, but this past week there were more than usual. I was even confronted by a stranger in my car a couple of days ago as I was leaving. He whispered something, but it wasn't in English or Spanish, but it sounded familiar. If you had to guess, what language do you think it was? I really don't know. Could you describe him for me? Oh yes. I'll never forget him. We were standing under the streetlight where I always park my car. He was a little taller than I am, gaunt, sunken cheeks. He was dressed all in black and had a black knit hat that was pulled down to his eyebrows. Then she began to drift away as if she were going into a trance. And there was the odd faint smell. But more than that, it was the eyes. I'll never forget those eyes. The edges of the eyelids were swollen and blood red with a dark crust. The bottom eyelid sagged so much it looked as if the eyelid was going to turn inside out. The whites of his eyes were pink and covered with bright red veins. The iris and the pupil were dark black, almost like there was no iris, just a dark black pupil. She stopped and momentarily stared through Lindy and into the distance. Could you tell what race he was? I'm not sure. It was dark and all I could see was his face, but his skin looked dark, but not normal. It was like he was wearing dark, streaky makeup. Could it have been a mask? Possibly, but the skin wasn't stiff or loose like a rubber mask. It moved like real skin when he talked. Dr. Gasol fell into a thoughtful silence for a few moments and then focused on Lindy's eyes. That's what was Latin? I'm sure he spoke in Latin. Can you remember any of it? No. Once I looked at those eyes, I got so scared. I thought he was going to do something, but he dropped his head and walked away from me. That's when the smell hit me. It was like sulfur dioxide. That's what it was. Are you sure it was sulfur dioxide? Yes. I remembered the smell from chemistry in school, but this wasn't strong. And you're absolutely sure you've never seen him before? Was there anything in the way he walked, or his mannerisms, or his voice that reminded you of someone? I don't think so. But it happened so fast. Did anyone else see him when he confronted you? No. I'm always the last one to leave. Is there anything else you can remember? Any scars, tattoos, physical deformities, anything? No, he was completely covered, even his hands. Thank you. Please don't leave until I tell you it's okay. When can we open the clinic? We don't want you to open it for clients. We like to question your staff. There are several officers here who will be taking statements. Just one more thing, Detective Martin continued. Why didn't you call us about the man when he confronted you? It just makes things worse. If the papers find out that we're being targeted, it just draws more demonstrators. We try to keep a low profile, try not to attract attention. I wish you had contacted us. As Dr. Gasol dropped her eyes, they went vacant. So do I. In the future, please call us when anything like this happens. It was a rote response, one that had come from her 1,000 times with little thought and even less sincerity. It wasn't because she didn't care. She did. It's just that over the years, it had turned into a conditioned response. Dr. Gasol didn't answer. She turned and walked toward the entrance. Detective Martin turned toward Officer Russell and waved for him to come. Dr. Gasol inserted the key, looked at her reflection in the glass, and stopped in mid-turn of the key. She turned around and called out, "Detective Martin," his face, the skin. Detective Martin swung back toward her. What about his face? She walked toward Dr. Gasol. There was something odd about it. The makeup wasn't just streaky. There was something else, more than the streaky makeup. I'm not sure that I saw what I thought I saw. I'm still not sure. But I think part of his face was marked with rows of thin dashes. They started just above his eyebrows and went halfway down his nose. They wrapped around the side of his head all the way back along his temple to the knit cap. They even went between his eyes, across the bridge of his nose, and straight back from the corners of his eyes. So, are you saying that he might have been wearing a mask? No, not exactly. Not like a regular fake plastic mask. It looked odd, like it was part of his skin. Could it be a facial tattoo that looked like a mask? Tattoo? Maybe. Yeah, it could be a tattoo, but it's like they were etched into his skin. They were so faint, and I just wasn't sure because his face had all those brown streaks on it. How long were the marks? Probably not much more than 1/4 of an inch. They were like a series of dashes, like the broken lines on roads. So, strung together they were long. Then, as if some new realization flashed into her mind, she added, those eyes. They looked so sinister, and the marks looked like they were part of a horrifying mask that he carved into his face. Detective Martin asked, carved, like with a knife or something like it. Yes, it was just so horrifying, like one of those slasher movies. Martin waited a few seconds and then asked, is that all? I think so. It was dark, and I was startled and extremely frightened. Okay. Thank you. Martin shoved her business card toward Dr. Gasol's hand and told her, contact me if you remember anything else. Dr. Gasol's hand shook as she reached for the card. Is the clinic? As the tears welled up in the doctor's eyes, Lindy touched the doctor's hand. Don't worry. The clinic seems to be fine. We checked around the outside thoroughly. It looks as if no one broke in. Everything is locked up. Windows, doors. We looked through the windows, and everything appears to be fine. If you'll give me the keys, I'll have my men check the inside thoroughly. I can open it for you, Dr. Gasol said. To be safe, I'd rather have my people check. I can't guarantee that no one's in there. Dr. Gasol handed Lindy the keys and took several steps back. Detective Martin's men walked through the clinic and found it empty. The doctor looked relieved. Detective, do you think he'll be back? I mean, will we be safe? I doubt that he'll return. I think he's made his point. Detective Martin watched Dr. Gasol for a few seconds. Then she added the description of the man to the list in her notebook. Sergeant Russell was standing right behind Detective Martin when she turned around. Her head jolted back. As the spooky description rolled around in her thoughts, she quickly tried to shove her startled response back down. Sergeant Russell raised his hands in apology. Sorry, didn't mean to scare you. What? Scare me? I don't think so, she said, her heart still rhythmically racing. Showing weakness was intolerable, and she couldn't be weak. Ever. For any reason. That's what she had come to think was demanded. That's how she would always act, especially now with the burden that her heart was carrying. Detective Martin regained control by barking a command. Here's what I want you to do. She told Russell to call back to the station and have them send out 3 more officers to take statements. She addressed him only as officer, not Officer Russell or Sergeant Russell, even though Lindy had met Russell several times. With her new position and responsibilities, she had little time for niceties or small talk. Remembering a run-of-the-mill officer's name was inconsequential and about as small as a talk could be. Her reasoning was simple. She was here to do a job, not to be somebody's buddy. The real reason said more about her. The greater the distance she kept from others, the safer she felt. After all, she had already gotten entangled with one person in the department, and she vowed that it would never happen again. Distance meant safety, and now more than ever she needed to feel safe. It had been 3 months since she ended her entanglement, and she was not nearly over it. What bothered her even more was that, without missing a beat, her lover seemed to be moving on easily. But now, things are going to be different. In the future, she was going to be in charge, so she kept telling herself that there were far more important things to worry about. Even though Lindy had warned Detective Parker that this was her case, She knew that he would already be at the morgue talking to Melinda about what she had discovered. Lindy dreaded the thought of confronting him there. He would be charming, relaxed, and confident. She would be riding the razor's edge, resisting the temptation to snap at him. She dearly wished that she could get him to lose control. He hadn't yet, and that infuriated her. She also knew that the more emotion she showed, the less he would. The most he would do was to shrug and move to another conversation. She would be left baying at the moon, while he calmly listened and compassionately and logically responded. It drove her crazy. She believed that he knew that, but loved doing it anyway, at least to her. That drove her crazier. Chapter 4. Parting is not sweet sorrow. In keeping with dead things, the morgue was below ground level. The room was stainless steel and white except for Melinda's corner. She had made it as homey as a morgue could be. There were fresh flowers when they were in season, a potted African violet on the corner of her desk, and a wealth of small plastic cartoon characters scattered around her desk, keeping her sense of whimsy intact in the face of daily death. Surrounded by the dead, she seemed to be doing an admirable job. On the wall behind her hung a Looney Tunes clock, which hadn't worked for over a year. No one was sure if it had ever worked. It didn't matter. It was behind her, and she never looked at it for the time anyway. It was just for a small amusement. Melinda arrived with the body about 5 minutes after Parker. When she entered, he was waiting across the room, leaning against the counter with his arms folded, pretending that he had been waiting for a long time. "And the dead have been waiting for you," although the dead show little signs of impatience. "Never had a complaint from one of my patients. Nonetheless, you win. We even used the siren," Melinda announced. "The siren? For a dead person? Were you aware that she was already dead and there was really no hurry? We wouldn't want her to spoil now, would we? Guess not. On a personal note, I see that you and Lindy are still on the same speaking terms. I just wish you two weren't armed. I keep wondering when you're going to take 10 paces, turn and fire. Can't you two find a middle ground? I thought we had, but it seems that I was the only one thinking that. You certainly left her hot enough. I was afraid that steam would come streaming out of her ears. Not much I can do about it. You could try apologizing. Apologizing for what? Leaving her, you dolt. I'm not leaving her. I'm going to D.C. You really have no clue, do you? Obviously." He paused, shook his head, and said, "I'm done talking about this." She looked at her assistants. "Okay, guys, bring the other brain-dead person over here and flop her on the table. Gently." The gurney was pushed beside the autopsy table, and the assistants gently moved the woman onto the stainless steel pan. Melinda got to work while Parker watched inquisitively. From the ceiling, Melinda pulled down the microphone that hung over the body. She began narrating the autopsy. Melinda, no one dared to call her Mel, was meticulous, and Parker, unlike some others, knew not to rush her. She worked as if she were conducting a symphony. Her hands moved with rhythmic precision. Every step was a search for an answer. Every cut was done with care, as if she were a surgeon operating to save a life. First, she provided a general description of the woman. Caucasian, about 26 years old, light brown hair with blonde streaks, blue eyes, 5 feet 7 inches, 120 pounds. She described the clothes that the woman was wearing. She gently removed them and noted a faint odor on all of the clothes. Maybe sulfur dioxide. Once her clothes were removed and placed carefully in an evidence bag, she still noticed the smell and traced it back to the woman's hair. Then she started at the feet and described the exterior of the body. The ankles were raw, bruised, and bloody from struggling against a tight ligature. A large flap on the abdomen had been precisely cut and then sutured shut. The vagina had been sewn shut. The fingertips had been removed. The wrists were also raw, bruised, and bloody. The nipples had been cut off and the openings sutured. The head had been twisted 180 degrees. There were no old or recent scars, no tattoos, and no birthmarks. The clatter of the doorknob and soft latching of the door announced that Lindy had entered the room. Parker's back was to her. He was leaning forward against the autopsy table, watching, engrossed in Melinda's explanation. Melinda looked up. Parker looked over his shoulder. Come on in. This is fascinating, Parker announced, attempting to bury the hatchet. Melinda added, only if sick and demented constitutes as fascinating. May I talk to you for a moment, Detective Parker? Detective Martin forced out through her tightening jaw. Parker straightened, turned toward her, and waited. In private, please, she said, clenching her fists. He's already started his little games, she thought. He nodded and followed her out the door. He was smiling. When she turned to address him, she saw the smile and gritted harder. It had taken only a few seconds to rub her last, frayed, raw nerve. She knew that was his intention. What can I do for you, Lindy? I mean, Detective Martin? He still had that annoying smile. I don't want you here. I told you that this was my case. You need to back off. I know it is your case. I'm just circling the corpse looking for some tidbits to munch on. I won't get in your way, but I might have some insights that could help. You can keep your insights to yourself. I don't need your help or your condescending attitude or the annoying smile or your Tibetan philosophy. Actually, it's not Tibetan philosophy. Tibet is a country. Some people call a certain kind of Buddhism Tibetan Buddhism. However, there are many sects, such as Mahayana, Vajrayana, Hinayana, etc. She was steaming hot now and holding back a desire to launch into a violent tirade. Well, you can expand somewhere else and include someone else. You already opened my eyes to a lot of things, and to tell you the truth, if you're within sight, I'd rather be blind. She thrashed back into the morgue, forcing the door to slam in front of Parker. She was greeted by Melinda's smirk. Melinda, don't you start. Looks like you already have. I know love when I see it, and you've got it bad. Lindy gave her a harsh stare. Just tell me what you found. Melinda looked over Lindy's shoulder and rolled her eyes for Parker's benefit as he re-entered the room. Lindy jerked her head around in time to catch Parker shrugging. She jerked back and shuddered with anger. Melinda smiled again. Parker stood off to the side out of Lindy's sight. That appeared to antagonize her even more. Melinda pulled the microphone lower as she began to examine the interior of the body. She cut the sutures on the breasts. A portion of the major and minor ducts had been removed. Next, she cut the sutures to the large flap on the abdomen. She pulled the flap open. She looked at Parker. Confusion enveloped her face. She made a Y incision and exposed the internal organs. She pulled the large lighted magnifying glass and placed it over the abdomen. She stood up straight again. She removed, weighed, and took samples of the organs to be biopsied. She excised and emptied the stomach. She froze, staring at the contents. She looked up at Parker and then looked at the woman's head. She went to the head of the table, grabbed the woman's head, and twisted it back into position. She stepped to the side next to the head, took a last look at Parker. She wedged 2 fingers in the mouth and pulled down hard. With her head still down, Melinda pointed to a cabinet. Give me the flashlight on the first shelf. The small one. He got the flashlight and handed it to her. Displaying only dread, she looked at him and then at Lindy. She took a deep breath, pulled hard on the mouth again, and using the flashlight, looked in. She looked up and stared, unblinking, at the wall. Then she stepped away from the table and sat on a stool, still staring at nothing. She muttered, "Oh my God, what is it?" Parker asked. Melinda. He walked over to her, touched her shoulder, stepped in her sight, bent, and looked in her eyes. "Melinda," he said loudly. She snapped out of the trance and cleared her head with a shake. "Sorry. It's just that if I'm right, this is beyond horrible. This is more sadistic than anything I've ever seen or ever even heard about." Parker straightened and nearly bumped Lindy, who had moved up behind him. Melinda navigated around them and returned to the autopsy. She picked up the forceps. As she instructed, Parker stepped forward, grabbed the lower jaw, pulled the mouth open, and putting his hand behind the neck made it as straight as he could. She rooted around with the forceps. "I could get a grip on it, but I'm afraid I'll tear it if I pull on it." "Tear what?" Lindy asked impatiently. "I don't want to say, yet, because there's no point in exposing you to what I think it is if I'm wrong. It's just too awful to contemplate. It's bad enough I have to think about it." She made one last attempt and gave up. Her throat's too twisted. I'm going to have to cut her throat and open her larynx. Melinda had to use the vibrating saw and rib cutters. She didn't operate with the precision that was her trademark, but it couldn't be helped. If she has an open casket, she'll have to wear something with a high collar, she said in an attempt to reduce her horror as she cut. Both Lindy and Parker let out a small, uncomfortable laugh. Lindy choked hers back when she caught Parker's eyes looking at her. Melinda carefully extracted a lumpy, winding mass and placed it in a pan on a cart next to the autopsy table. She wheeled it over to a large lighted magnifying glass and set the pan on the counter next to the pan with the stomach contents. "Oh my God, what was wrong with this man?" she muttered. Then she pulled some pieces from the stomach contents and placed them under the magnifier. She stood up and silently stared at the wall. "This man is a sadistic, evil degenerate. What he did is unimaginable." Nearly in unison, Detectives Martin and Parker anxiously asked, "What?" Melinda pulled the magnifying glass over the pan with the material from the throat. All three gazed through the magnifier. "You're looking at one of a woman's reproductive organs. It's one piece. Either he shoved it down her throat after she was dead, or she choked on it, but he would have to have done that before he twisted her head around." "Do you think that she choked to death?" Detective Martin asked. "Possibly." "Melinda, can you tell if she has had an abortion recently?" Parker asked. "From this mess? I won't know until I examine tissue samples. But considering where the body was dumped, that's a possibility." It truly was more horrible than any of them could imagine. All three stared at the woman's bloodless body, now cut open from her throat to her abdomen. They remained silent and motionless. The horror of what the woman had endured was impossible to comprehend. Melinda was the first to come back from the depths of the man's depravity. "What he did wasn't easy. So, we're looking for a skilled surgeon and a place and the equipment to do the surgery," Parker added, his voice beginning to shake. "Most likely, or he read about how to do it and was just meticulous." She pulled the magnifier over the stomach contents, took about 15 small pieces, and assembled them. "I believe these are pieces of her ovary, fallopian tube, and uterus. However, there's something else." All of the contents of the stomach were partially digested. As soon as Lindy saw Melinda's face, she knew what that meant. "Oh my God." He fed her the pieces while she was still alive. What they imagined that the young woman had suffered struck all three at the same time. Lindy and Melinda were in tears, and Parker had lost his Buddhist calm. He was trembling. Lindy went to the corner, sat on a stool, and dropped her head into her hands. Parker looked at her. Then he looked at Melinda. Melinda nodded for him to go to her. He walked over, squatted in front of her, and touched her hands. She raised her head and let her hands be encompassed by his. Her head fell onto his shoulder. She wept. She was soft and vulnerable and so very human now, and he wanted her to stay that way. He didn't like the hard Lindy, but he also wouldn't have changed his future plans even if she were perpetually soft and vulnerable. Whatever she had brought to their relationship, it wasn't as important as the opportunity to move on to bigger things. She had filled an empty part of his life for a time, but she was no competition for his ambition, which he was easily able to rationalize by modifying his Buddhist philosophy. He wasn't being cruel, he was being detached. After a few moments, the pain in his legs was becoming unbearable and he dropped to his knees. She raised her head. For a few seconds, her despair and empathy for the woman became lost in his eyes. He smiled with detached sympathy. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, she pushed hard against his chest. He fell backwards. His rear hit hard on the floor. "I don't need your fake sympathy," she shouted as she rose. She went back to Melinda. The cold, hard Lindy had returned. "Okay, what else do we know?" she said as she wiped away the tears. Parker stood, walked over to the table, and waited silently. There was nothing left to say. He had tried to leave her with something kind to remember, but he had failed. The gesture was too small and far too late, and far too insincere for the damage he had done. Melinda had no more patience for these two. Without looking at either of them, she gruffly ordered them to leave. She said that she still had the brain to remove and examine and samples to send away to be examined. It might take as long as 2 weeks to get the results back. As the door closed behind Parker, Lindy asked Melinda what she had divulged to him about the body before she had arrived. Are you 12 years old? Ask him yourself. You have to tell me. I'm in charge of this case. Without turning around, Melinda responded, like everyone else, you can read the report when it is finished. Now, if you're not going to grow up, get the hell out of here. As Lindy slowly boiled, she glared at Melinda's back. She felt that Melinda should have sympathy for her. She was the one who was the victim, not him, and she vowed to take every opportunity to let him and everyone else remember. For his close friends, she promised herself to make a special effort to make their lives a little less pleasant. Lindy shot several final daggers at the back of Melinda's head, whirled around, and stormed out. As Lindy left the lab, she grumbled to herself. Grow up? If that bitch thinks I'm going to beg for his help, she's out of her fucking mind. I don't need his help, and I certainly don't need his Buddhist mumbo-jumbo. She told herself that she would still find the killer, and she didn't need him to do that. Not this time. Not ever again. As a creeping fear of failure grew, she felt uneasy. Suddenly, it dawned on Lindy that she had a crucial piece of information about which Parker knew nothing: the man with tattoo face or mask. She had the description of the man who had confronted the director of the clinic. Other than Dr. Gasol, the clinic director, no one else knew, especially not the meddling Detective Lotus Petal. Lindy found herself smirking as she entered the elevator to go to her office. Whatever satisfaction she had retrieved from her secret, it was soon replaced as she was walking up to her desk. Like a black sheet thrown over her eyes, darkness descended. Within seconds, a bright strike of light pierced the darkness and drove a sharp spike of pain into her head. She cringed, staggered, caught the edge of her desk with her hands, and steadied herself. Her first thought was that one of her migraine headaches had started, but the bright light faded rapidly and her vision adjusted. She had had migraines before, but they had never disappeared that quickly. This one had left in less than 10 seconds, but she felt that it had left something behind, and it wasn't pain. It was a residual, odd feeling, nothing she could clearly define, just a sensation that something was different, not overpowering, only a remnant of something. She sat and mindlessly shuffled papers as she waited for the feeling to completely disappear. It lingered. She nudged the feeling to the side. There was an investigation to conduct.